king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 90 Liv Hamler. The next morning, before the new year, Marin, along with 10 followers, went to Gelsenkirchen with Adler, intending to spy on the eldest daughter of the Hamler family. The most important thing was to let Adler take a look and see if she met his requirements. As usual, after arriving near Gelsenkirchen, Marin, Adler and others settled down in a nearby town. Saul, on the other hand, quietly took a small monocular telescope and went to spy near Hamler Manor. Marin, Adler and others stayed in a hotel in the town temporarily. Because of boredom, Marin dragged Adler to play poker. How could Adler be Marin's opponent? So he found Kahn, who was worse than him, to play with him, and at the same time, to help him gain confidence. Adler is not smart, but that is relative. Because Adler has received cultural education from Mrs. Marin since he was a child, and he can be considered a scholar, and he still has some wisdom. As for Kahn, he is a typical rough man, full of muscles, but no brains. Marin can count cards when playing cards, which shows that he is highly intelligent. Adler can't catch up with Marin, but he is unwilling to be the last. So, he found Kahn, who is even dumber, and let Kahn shuffle the cards every time. So, poor Kahn, he became the shuffler every time. Fortunately, he didn't gamble, otherwise Kahn would lose everything. In medieval poker, K was the biggest card. Because K represented the king, and was naturally the biggest card, the big and small jokers had not yet appeared at that time, they were invented by Americans. Later, A and 2 became the biggest cards because of the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, the people were the masters of the country. Therefore, A and 2, which were originally the smallest cards, turned into the biggest cards, representing the lower class people, and took control of the state power. However, it is the Middle Ages now, so A and 2 are naturally the smallest. Marin did not intend to change the rules, because everyone played that way, and if he changed the rules himself, he would not be able to play happily with others. After lunch in the afternoon, Marin and his friends were happily playing cards when Saul suddenly barged in. Master, the people are coming out." "What? Miss Hamler is out." "Out? Where did you go?" "Looks like he came to town to buy New Year's goods." "Very good, close the stall, and let's go to the roadside to stop Miss Hamler." "Adler, go take a look and see if it suits your taste. By the way, Saul, Miss Hamler isn't wearing a helmet, is she?" Saul was speechless. "Master, we are here to buy New Year's goods, not to fight." "Why are you wearing a helmet?" Marin thought it was right, so he and Adler took off their breastplates, wore only casual clothes, and went out to the street with knights' light swords, intending to have an accidental encounter with Miss Hamler. Kahn, on the other hand, had a miserable look on his face. He had lost many games, and finally he had a good hand, with 2 bombs and several big cards, and it was hard not to win. But when Saul came, the game ended halfway. Just like that, Kahn's extravagant hope of winning once was also gone. On the main road leading to Gelsenkirchen from the small town of Odstad in the south of Gelsenkirchen, Marin and Adler, along with Kahn and Sauer, stood by the road, ready to peek at Miss Hamler openly. As for why only 4 of them came, it was mainly because they were afraid that Miss Hamler would misunderstand. "You brought 10 followers, a total of 12 men with swords, how could you not scare people? People who didn't know the truth would think you were here to rob. On the contrary, 4 people are just right." After all, according to Saul's intelligence, Miss Hamler also brought 5 followers. Among them, 3 followers were light cavalry with swords. The other 2 followers drove a 4-wheeled carriage to carry New Year's goods. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with the sound of a creaking axle, a heroic female knight, accompanied by 3 thugs in a large carriage, appeared in the sight of the 4 people. When he got closer, Marin took a closer look. "Wow, she's not bad looking." This female knight was about 1.8 meters tall, which was definitely a giant among medieval women, even taller than Marin. The girl was also wearing casual clothes, carrying a knight's light sword, and looked capable. In Marin's opinion, she looked very much like a German sports star in later generations, Britta Heidmann. The 2 are very similar in height and appearance, both of them are very sweet. However, Liv Hamler, the eldest daughter of the Hamler family, has blonde curly hair, while Britta Heidmann has straight hair. It may have been straightened by a hairdresser. However, their facial expressions were completely different. Britta Heidmann usually had a friendly smile on her face, while the eldest daughter of the Hamler family had a tense face and her hand was on the hilt of the sword, ready to fight at any time. In fact, the mark is located in the north-central part of Germany, which is relatively peaceful. Although there were many bandits in the Middle Ages, most of them were active in mountainous areas. In the plains of north-central Germany, bandits had nowhere to hide and were easily wiped out. Not to mention using regular troops, even if a few local lords privately gathered dozens of knights, they could easily wipe out the groups of bandits. Only in mountainous areas, where bandits can hide easily and knights' horses cannot pass easily, is it not easy to wipe out. And this Miss Liv Hamler, walking on Taiping Avenue, always looked ready to fight with others, which made Marin feel that this girl was too aggressive. Although she had a sweet appearance like Xiaoya, Britta Heidmann's Chinese name, Marin just didn't like her. He always felt that what he saw was not a beauty, but a tigress ready to pounce on people at any time. Of course, different people have different tastes. Marin has no feelings for this tough girl, but his brother Adler is the opposite. When Marin turned his eyes to Adler's face, he saw Adler, who looked like a pig. Adler, who had never been interested in sex, looked like spring had come, and his face was full of spring. It was obvious that the big boy Adler was thinking about love. So, Adler, who was staring at the scene, wiped the saliva that accidentally flowed from the corner of his mouth when the team led by Miss Liv Hamler approached, and walked out. "Stop, don't come near. Otherwise, I won't be polite." Miss Liv Hamler suddenly saw a tall and strong man rushing out on the road. Her first feeling was not that he was handsome, but that she thought, "Damn it, someone dared to stop the team I lead, he is looking for death." However, seeing Adler's extremely strong body, Liv Hamler became a little unconfident. So, she pulled out her knight's rapier, revealing the cold light of the sword as a warning. But Adler's state at this time has been adjusted to the single channel of, "I only have eyes for you," and he completely ignored Liv Hamler's shouting and threats, and only looked at Liv Hamler's face. In Adler's eyes at this time, Miss Hamler is simply an angel. Even her angry expression is so charming. Liv Hamler was also a little angry when she saw that the other party ignored her warning. So, she drew out her knight's light sword a long way and was about to draw it out of the scabbard. Marin saw that this was not going to work. With Adler's current state of daze, even if the tough girl on the opposite side slashed at him with a sword, he might not be able to react. So, he immediately ran out and pushed Adler, who was in a daze. But unexpectedly, Adler didn't react at all, and just stared at Liv Hamler's face in a daze. Probably thinking of some inappropriate scene for children, Adler's face suddenly turned red, and then he smiled obscenely. That expression, facing the beauty in the middle of the road, was very much like robbing her. Liv Hamler was also surprised when she saw another young man with a sword jumping out. But when she saw Marin's thin body, she curled her lips in disdain. But when she saw the big bear Khan holding a shortened version of the mace on the side of the road, her pupils shrank suddenly. Even the shortened mace is about 1.2 meters long, and it is absolutely powerful when it hits. The iron nails on the head of the stick have a damage bonus. So, Liv Hamler had to be careful. And Saul, who was standing aside, had been a coolie in Bochum for a long time in his early years, and he also exercised a body of muscles and looked stronger. So, Liv Hamler was a little hesitant. She brought 3 thugs with her. Although they were riding horses, they only wore light swords and no armor. On the other side, Khan and Saul wore 2/3 of the breastplate. Moreover, their horses were on the side of the road and looked like war horses. If they really fought, Liv Hamler would not be sure. Because the 3 light cavalrymen he brought this time were not very powerful and were at the bottom of the Hamler family. He brought them here just to serve as laborers to load the goods onto the carriages. Because they were unsure, Liv Hamler led the others to confront Marin and the other 4 without saying a word or taking the initiative to attack. Khan and Saul also realized something was wrong, and they quickly got on their horses and prepared for battle. Marin naturally saw that something was wrong, so he forcibly dragged away Adler, who was still laughing foolishly, apologized to Liv Hamler, and went back to town. Anyway, the purpose of their visit this time was just to see if this woman was suitable for Adler. Now that the purpose had been achieved, there was no need to meddle in other people's affairs. Chapter 91 I Want to Compete. On the way home, Adler was in a daze the whole time, laughing foolishly from time to time. Fortunately, he was a good rider and did not fall off the horse. In addition, it was also fortunate that there were no dump, so no one could hit and kill him. An old horse driver, several times, Adler, absent-minded, drove his horse straight to the river. Fortunately, Marin and others flanked Adler on both sides and forced Adler's horse to drive to the road. Back at Hoffman Manor, old Hoffman and Lady Mary hurriedly asked, "How is it? What's going on?" "Just look at Adler's condition and you'll understand," Marin said speechlessly. "What's wrong with this kid? Why does he look so dull?" Old Hoffman was puzzled. "You're obviously suffering from lovesickness," Marin said unhappily. "Oh, wow, Adler has come to his senses. That girl is very beautiful. Marin, tell us what happened. Mrs. Mary became excited and seemed very interested in this gossip. That girl, she's pretty, taller than me, seems to be quite aggressive. Adler seemed to have fallen in love with the girl at first sight and became stupid. Look, I don't know what naughty plot he was thinking about, he was smiling so silly that even drooling. Marin patted his head speechlessly. Ahahaha. Old Hoffman laughed with glee. What's so funny? It's normal for a son to miss a woman when he's old enough. When you saved me, didn't you hold me tightly and refuse to let go? Lady Mary scolded. This. Old Hoffman was embarrassed and his embarrassing past was exposed. In the beginning, the reason why old Hoffman saved Lady Mary was not only because of his chivalry, but also because of Lady Mary's beauty, which was also an important motivation for him to be so passionate and fight against 4 fierce assassins. Madam, are you right? Should we go and sign up for Adler? Old Hoffman asked cautiously. Well, I just wonder if Adler can beat the other competitors. My son, there will be no problem. Old Hoffman was very confident. Just as the couple was discussing helping Adler sign up for the martial arts competition, Adler seemed to have just come to his senses and belatedly shouted to old Hoffman, Father, Mother, I want to participate in the tourney. I want to marry Miss Hamler. Everyone was stunned, and then burst into laughter. Adler, your mother and I have decided to sign you up. You little brat, if you can't beat others, go and get 50 military sticks yourself. Old Hoffman said with a smile, ah. In the following days, the family first celebrated the new year of the Gregorian calendar. Then, after the new year, old Hoffman sent someone to Gelsenkirchen Manor to register Adler. The person who was sent to register came back and reported the process of the competition. This martial arts competition is divided into 2 events, horse fighting and foot fighting. The distance of the horse battle is very short, with the total length of the stadium being only 30 meters. The charging distance between the 2 players is only 15 meters. This distance is simply impossible for a heavy knight to charge. Because the heavy knight's warhorse has a high load-bearing capacity, the acceleration is very slow. A distance of 15 meters simply cannot increase the speed. On the battlefield, the distance for starting a charge is generally more than 200 meters. When Marin participated in the WIN night trial, the charging distance was not far, but it also reached 30 meters. Marin was lucky to have suffered a minor injury that time, as some people directly broke their arms and legs. However, Knight Hamler also had his own opinion. He meant that this competition was not a life-and-death duel, and he did not want to see anyone get into an accident on the field. You know, knightly jousting is a very dangerous activity with a high casualty rate. Once the heavy cavalry is at full speed, the 2 sides collide, and the one who is knocked off the horse does not fall off the horse, but flies off the horse. The fall to the ground is very heavy. If you are unlucky, your head will hit the ground first, and you may break your neck and die on the spot. If someone died in Hamel Manor because of the competition, Hamel Knight would inevitably be hated. Therefore, he simply reduced the charge distance to 15 meters so that the knights could not rush. In this way, when the 2 sides come into contact, they rely more on combat skills and personal strength rather than the impact of the horse. Even if they are knocked off the horse, they fall off the horse instead of flying off the horse. In this way, the possibility of casualties is greatly reduced. In addition, the lances used in the competition are not sharp metal heads, but wooden blunt heads, which greatly reduces the lethality. At the same time, it is strictly forbidden to point the lance at the opponent's head in this night competition, otherwise, it will be treated as a waiver. Because, no matter how blunt the wooden lance is, it is easy to cause the opponent's death if it hits the head. King Henry II of France was hit in the head during the night competition and died of serious injuries, although this has not happened yet. In addition, the lance must not be used to stab the horse in the competition. Because war horses are valuable assets. For some poor wandering knights, war horses may be his most expensive property. If they are lost, they may go bankrupt. As for foot combat, the Knights of Hamel also made adjustments. Although the knights still wore plate armor, they no longer used metal weapons, but instead used oak 2-handed swords or wooden hammers provided by the manor. In this way, because they were wearing plate armor, even if they were defeated, they would not be killed or injured. All in all, this competition looked more like a friendly exchange than a life-and-death fight. Moreover, the loser of this competition did not need to hand over his armor and horse, but was only eliminated from the marriage-seeking event. After hearing your conditions, the old Hoffman couple and Marin breathed a sigh of relief. Since the danger has been reduced, it is the best. After all, they don't want Adler to kill himself or cripple himself in order to fight for a woman. However, Adler was like a drug addict these days, dragging Marin to practice fighting. How could Marin be a match for this wild bear? In order to avoid being beaten, Marin simply closed the door and released the other wild bear, Con, to let the two bears fight each other. And he happily watched the two bears fighting and getting bruised and battered. Chapter 92, Being Beaten. In a blink of an eye, 7 or 8 days had passed since the new year. On January 8, Marin accompanied Adler to Odstad, a small town near Gelsenkirchen, and booked 3 upper rooms in the town's hotel and 3 ordinary rooms for his men. The reason why Marin came here a week in advance was actually to accompany Adler to get information about his competitors. Because on January 8, many knights who came to participate in the competition had basically arrived in Odstad. However, there were only 2 hotels in the town. Fortunately, Marin had someone book a room long ago. Otherwise, he might not be able to find a place to stay. Although Bochum is not far from Gelsenkirchen, it is not a big deal to ride a horse over there. But Marin wanted to see the situation, so starting from January 8, Marin accompanied Adler to the streets of Odstad every day to find out the news of the opponent. In the 15th century, knights were still very noble, and generally, whenever a knight arrived in a small town like Odstad, news would spread. Because, according to custom, after the knight arrived at a place and settled down, his followers would usually brag to others about their master's great reputation and unparalleled military achievements when they went out to purchase. Therefore, as long as you go to the streets and ask around in the beer halls, you can get a lot of useful information. Even many knights like to go to the beer halls to drink and brag about their great achievements to the drunkards. Marin's guess was correct. At this time, the tavern in Odstad was full of knights and knights' squires who had come from other places, as well as people who had heard the news and came to watch the fun. The Germans of this era may not be as gossipy as the Chinese. However, the exciting scene of the knights' competition is something that the martial Germans are unwilling to miss. Although the intensity of the competition is limited due to conditions, it still attracts many people to watch. Many knights were even unable to stay in the hotels because they were full, so they had to live in tents or rent houses. And those unmarried knights who came to participate in the tournament to find a bride, like Marin and his friends, liked to inquire about the news of other competitors. Even in the tavern, drunken knights and other competitors, because they disliked each other, first had a bloody conversation like, "What are you looking at? What's wrong with looking at you? Try to look at me again," and then started fighting. However, in order to avoid casualties, Old Hamler required the contestants not to fight in Odstad, otherwise they would be disqualified. Therefore, everyone fought with bare hands. Moreover, in order to ensure chivalry, it was usually a one-on-one duel between knights, and the squires did not participate. Marin suddenly felt a little regretful. If his servants could participate, he would definitely take Con, the wild bear, to PK with people. Because, with bare hands, Con, who was extremely powerful, could beat even a knight like Adler who had practiced martial arts since childhood. Only in horse battles could Adler suppress Con with his skilled horse martial arts. In foot battles, even in armed fights, Adler often lost and was beaten, because Con's mace was very fierce. For 3 days, Marin and Adler watched countless fights. The fights between knights, even with bare hands, were quite exciting. Although not as good as martial arts movies, they were still very exciting. But from Marin's point of view, among the knights fighting he had seen in the past 3 days, basically no one was Adler's opponent. And with Adler, the big guy standing there, no knight was willing to provoke him easily. However, on the 11th, the situation changed. Another group of knights came from other places. Among them, there were strong knights of the same level as Adler. So, a duel inevitably took place. On the evening of the 11th, Adler was challenged in a beer can next to the hotel. The one who challenged Adler was a Saxon knight who had just arrived, named Mavis. He was over 1.9 meters tall, taller than Adler, and his muscles were slightly better than Adler's. The key point was that he was already in his 20s, which was the prime of a knight. Generally speaking, a knight needs to undergo more than 10 years of training before he can qualify. The peak of a knight usually begins around the age of 25 or 26, and starts to decline after the age of 35. During this period, knights have strong explosive power and are skilled in martial arts. Moreover, they have more fighting experience and are more cunning than those knights around 20 years old. A man in his early 20s like Adler is not bad in martial arts, but his experience and knowledge are far behind those knights who are 20 years older. For example, Mavis was not only physically strong and skilled in martial arts, but also had rich combat experience. In 1491, he followed the Duke of Saxony to help Emperor Maximilian I quell the rebellion in Flanders, the Netherlands, and experienced many battles. But in that war, Mavis personally killed more than 20 rebels. The scar on his neck was left by a skilled swordsman in Flanders. However, in the end, the swordsman died, and Mavis survived. Moreover, that time, Mavis was injured while helping the Duke of Saxony to resist the swordsman who intended to assassinate the Duke. Therefore, because of his merits, he was officially canonized as a knight by the Duke of Saxony and had a small knight's territory. Before that, Mavis, like Marin, was also a wandering knight without inheritance rights. After years of fighting and killing, Mavis had a lot of combat experience. After arriving in the town, he carefully observed the tavern. As a result, he looked down on those guys who were making a lot of noise, but he cared more about Adler who was just watching the fun with Marlin. Because Adler was big and looked mature. Mavis was not sure about Adler's age, mainly because Adler was a little tanned and looked a little old, and he didn't know whether Adler had rich combat experience, so he decided to take the initiative to test. "Hey, you big idiot over there, you're smiling so meanly, it really annoys me." Mavis took the initiative to provoke. Adler was stunned for a moment, then said angrily, "You're such a bitch. Hey, you're quite an arrogant boy. If you don't agree, let's have a fight." Mavis took the initiative to challenge him. "Train your uncle, you say you want to train. What do you think of that?" Marin grabbed Adler who was having an outburst and retorted sharply. Marin was a little uneasy. Seeing Mavis's mean look, he could tell at a glance that this guy was a veteran who had definitely traveled a lot and had fought a lot. Although Adler was very good at martial arts, his experience was really poor. Because Adler had never left Bochum since he was a child. The scar on Mavis' neck also made Marin a little afraid. To have such a big scar on his neck, he must have experienced a life-and-death struggle. And how many people who survived a life-and-death struggle are easy to mess with? However, Adler had a different opinion. He broke away from Marin's hand and said, "Marin, let me fight him. He is probably also a participant in this competition. We will meet each other eventually. Why not try his skills first?" Marin thought about it and it made sense, so he let go and let Adler and Mavis walk out of the tavern. At the entrance of the tavern, a crowd of people began to watch the fight. Adler and Mavis, wearing only breastplate armor and bare-handed, stood 10 meters apart, staring into each other's eyes. Mavis is indeed a seasoned veteran. As soon as he stood up, he began to mock Adler. "Hey, you little fool over there, are you here to participate in the martial arts competition to find a husband as well? With your awful appearance, are you worthy of Miss Hamler? Well, maybe, after I marry Miss Hamler, I can consider betrothing her maid to you. The premise is that you are willing to be my knight squire." Slave, Adler was very angry. "I'm such a good fighter, but I just have to be a servant." "Yeah, I'm just a servant. Although you look like a bear, you are still young. Have you ever been to the battlefield? Have you ever killed anyone? I can tell at a glance that you haven't. I have traveled all over the country and participated in wars. You have a lot to learn from me. So, don't be unconvinced, you are only worthy of being a servant to me. IXXXXXX. Adler was angry. Originally, he felt a little depressed because his younger brother Marin overshadowed him, because the outside world said that he was not as good as his younger brother. Now, Mavis looked down on him and said that he was only worthy of being a knight squire, which just hit his sore spot. So, Adler exploded. Marin felt bad when he heard Mavis mocking Adler. Marin could guess Adler's thoughts to some extent. As the eldest son in the family, Adler was overshadowed by his younger brother, no, not overshadowed by a lot. Because Marin was already a baron, while Adler was not even a formal knight, so Adler was under great psychological pressure. Now, Mavis happened to poke at this scar, which was bound to irritate Adler. As expected, Adler rushed forward angrily, raised his fist as big as a casserole, and smashed it into Mavis' face. However, Mavis was also a man with a lot of fighting experience, so he was not panicked. Adler rushed up from 10 meters away, and his impact force should not be underestimated. Therefore, Mavis did not confront him head-on. Because he did not rush up, the impact force was insufficient. If he confronted him head-on, Mavis might suffer. Mavis, who was tall and strong, nimbly dodged to the side and slid to avoid Adler's collision. Marin, who was standing next to him, had a flash of light in his eyes, knowing that Mavis was not easy to mess with. If Mavis foolishly confronted Adler head-on, Marin might not be worried. Because Adler might not lose to Mavis by much. But if the equally strong Mavis used other means, the upright Adler would be in trouble. Sure enough, when Adler rushed over, Mavis did not attack Adler from behind. Because that was not in line with the spirit of chivalry. It was not that Mavis was really chivalrous, but because there were so many people watching, he had to act like a gentleman. If it was on the battlefield, Mavis would definitely take the opportunity to attack. However, when Adler just turned around, Mavis took advantage of Adler's unstable footing, stepped forward and yanked Adler's right arm, raised his knee, and hit Adler's crotch. In fact, such a move was very despicable in a knight's tournament. However, as a veteran who had been on the battlefield, Mavis was very thick-skinned. He didn't care if he used some dirty moves. Besides, he had restrained himself by not attacking Adler from behind. Moreover, this move was actually a feint, and it would not really hit Adler's crotch at all, but was just used to scare Adler. Sure enough, when Adler saw Mavis use such a shameless trick, he panicked. Because Adler had never seen the world, and usually fought with others in a friendly way. When he encountered the shameless Mavis, who used such a dirty trick, he panicked. In order to avoid being crippled, Adler dodged to the left and shook off Mavis's hand. However, because he dodged so quickly, his footing was unstable. This was exactly what Mavis wanted. While Adler was forcibly moving to the left, Mavis kicked him with his foot. Adler hurriedly kicked back. The right feet of both sides collided, making a loud noise. However, Adler was not standing firmly at this time, while Mavis was the opposite. Moreover, Mavis's strength was not inferior to Adler's at all, and even slightly exceeded it. Therefore, Adler suffered a great loss from this kick, and retreated several steps and almost lost his balance. How could the cunning Mavis miss this good opportunity? He rushed forward, swung his fist, and began to hit Adler. Adler hurriedly parried, and was completely suppressed in terms of momentum. Moreover, after the two sides had a fist-to-fist confrontation, Adler tragically discovered that the guy on the other side was stronger than him. Coupled with the fact that he was suppressed in momentum, Adler fell into a difficult battle. Finally, after dozens of rounds, Mavis took advantage of Adler's negligence and punched Adler in the face. While Adler was focusing on that, he suddenly kicked Adler in the chest and sent him flying. Fortunately, Adler was wearing a breastplate. If he hadn't, he would have been kicked by Mavis, the wild bear, with such force that his internal organs might have been dislocated. Marin took a deep breath. What a strong opponent. He began to worry. With this guy around, Adler's chances of winning the martial arts competition were basically slim. Being knocked to the ground meant losing the fist and kick contest. Marin quickly stepped forward, helped Adler, who looked dissatisfied and depressed, up, and returned to the hotel. Although Marin wanted to fight Mavis, he would be ridiculed if he did so. Because, in this era, duels between knights should be fair and sacred. If Marin broke this rule, he would not be able to stay in the noble circle. And Khan, who had the strongest unarmed combat ability among Marin's men, was only a knight squire, not even an apprentice, and had no qualifications to challenge Mavis. Therefore, Marin and Adler had to swallow this loss. But the loss is secondary. The biggest thing is that Adler may have no hope of winning the marriage contest this time. In 2 days, the old Hoffman couple will also come. If Adler loses to Mavis in the contest in front of everyone, it will be a shame. Moreover, Adler will lose the opportunity to win the beauty. Marin does not expect Adler to win Mavis in a horse fight, because Mavis is a fierce man who can survive after charging on the battlefield. With his infinite strength and skilled martial arts, plus rich practical experience, he must be as good as Adler. In fact, people who have been on the battlefield will definitely be able to suppress Adler in momentum. It can be predicted that Mavis has a much better chance of winning than Adler. Apparently, Adler also thought of this. So, after returning, Adler became silent. He, who has always been heartless, showed a rare expression of worry on his face.